If you had asked me 3 years ago whether I believed in soulmates, I would have said yes. Not the sappy movie kind, but the real, gritty partnership where you weather life storms together. When I met Emily, it felt like she was that person. We worked together in the same hospital, me as a doctor, her as a nurse, and it didn't take long before our professional rapport blossomed into something deeply personal. Emily had this infectious laugh and a way of turning the most chaotic shifts into manageable puzzles. That first year of dating felt like a dream. Late-night takeouts after long shifts, road trips on our rare weekends off, and quiet nights when we'd sit together, talking about the future like it was something we could mold together. I thought I knew her, all of her, but as I sat in my office 3 months before our wedding, scrolling through venues and debating centerpieces, I didn't realize how blind I'd been. Emily and I had been planning this wedding for a year. The venue, a stunning vineyard tucked into the countryside, was a place she had fallen in love with instantly. It was all coming together, the floral arrangements, the catering, even the custom playlist we had painstakingly curated. Her mother, Linda, was ecstatic and constantly offering help, though her assistance was usually more of a passive-aggressive critique. Linda had a boyfriend, Dan, a man who hovered around the periphery of our plans like a casual observer. He was friendly enough but gave off the vibe of someone used to skimming through life's obligations without fully engaging. Emily didn't seem to care much about him one way or another, which made sense. Linda had been dating him for less than a year, and Emily was too focused on the wedding to pay him much attention. I'd always prided myself on my intuition, especially in the ER, where gut instinct often mattered as much as skill. But when it came to my personal life, I had blinders on. The wedding was consuming me, not because I cared about the details, but because I wanted everything to be perfect for Emily. I wanted her to feel like she was stepping into a fairy tale. In hindsight, maybe that's why I didn't notice the cracks forming in our foundation. It was during one of those wedding planning weekends that Emily mentioned attending a medical conference. She framed it as a great networking opportunity, and I didn't think twice about it. She left on a Thursday evening, bags packed with professional wear and a glossy excitement in her eyes. I stayed back, tied up in shifts and appointments, content knowing she was out there making connections for her career. When she returned, she was distant. At the time, I chalked it up to exhaustion. Conferences were mentally taxing. I knew that. She didn't talk much about it except to say it had been productive, and I didn't press her. I trusted her. Trust was supposed to be the bedrock of a marriage, right? I couldn't have known then that the events of that trip would slowly unravel everything I believed about Emily, about us, and about the life we were building. The first signs were subtle, a shift in her demeanor, little lies that didn't seem worth confronting. I brushed them aside, too preoccupied with saving lives at work and dreaming about the future we'd share. And so, the days rolled on, filled with excitement about the impending wedding. Friends and family marked their calendars. RSVPs trickled in, and Emily seemed to ease back into her usual self. We even had a night to celebrate with Linda and Dan over dinner. Linda was her usual sharp-tongued self, ribbing me about my inability to pick a tie color without Emily's input, while Dan stayed quiet, sipping his wine and nodding politely. It was a quiet moment in a long build-up to chaos, and I took it for granted. Looking back now, that dinner feels like the prelude to a storm I never saw coming. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of appointments and checklists. Tuxedo fittings, cake tastings, and late-night discussions about seating charts consumed my free time. Emily was always buzzing with energy, bouncing between decisions like whether the bouquets should have ivory roses or lilies. I let her take the lead. It seemed to make her happy, and I enjoyed seeing her in her element. Still, something about her felt off. It wasn't anything I could pinpoint, just a lingering sense that her smiles didn't quite reach her eyes, and her bursts of enthusiasm were sometimes replaced by moments of unexplained quiet. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd brush it off, blaming work stress or the demands of planning a wedding. I wanted to believe her. Hell, I needed to believe her. But then there were the late-night phone calls. At first, I thought they were work-related. Emily had always been dedicated to her job, sometimes going above and beyond what was required. She'd step into the next room, lowering her voice just enough, so I couldn't make out her words. When I asked about it, she'd smile and say it was a patient or an issue with the nursing schedule. It seemed reasonable enough, but the unease lingered. One night, curiosity got the better of me. Emily had gone to bed early, leaving her phone on the kitchen counter. As I sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey, her phone buzzed with a notification. I glanced at it, expecting an innocuous message or an email alert. Instead, I saw a single name flash across the screen: Dan, her mom's boyfriend. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Dan could have been reaching out about something wedding-related. Maybe Linda had asked him to coordinate something. But then why would Emily keep that from me? And why the hell would he be messaging her late at night? I decided to let it go. I wasn't proud of the way my mind spiraled. This was Emily, my Emily. The woman I loved, the woman I was about to marry. There had to be a logical explanation. So I buried the unease, swallowing it down like bitter medicine, and convinced myself I was being paranoid. The next few days were packed with wedding prep. Emily seemed lighter, happier, and it put me at ease. Whatever my doubts were, they began to dissolve under the weight of her laughter and the way she leaned into me during those fleeting moments of calm. But then Dan started showing up more often. He never stayed long, always with some excuse. Dropping off Linda's dress, asking Emily about last-minute venue details, or just swinging by to say hi. Linda wasn't always with him, which struck me as strange. But again, I brushed it off. I told myself it was a testament to how involved he wanted to be, how supportive he was trying to be for Linda and her daughter. Still, I couldn't shake the way Emily's posture stiffened whenever he was around, or how she'd busy herself with tasks to avoid too much eye contact with him. Once, I caught Dan watching her with an expression I couldn't quite place. It wasn't a friendly gaze. It lingered too long, almost like, no. I shoved the thought away before it could take root. One night, Linda invited us over for dinner. Emily was hesitant but eventually agreed. Dan cooked, proudly presenting us with perfectly grilled steaks and sides that looked straight out of a magazine spread. Linda gushed over his culinary skills, and Emily laughed politely at his jokes. I tried to play the part of the engaged, affable fiancé, but something about the dynamic felt off. Linda excused herself midway through the evening to take a call, leaving the three of us in the dining room. I remember the moment vividly. Dan turned to Emily with a smirk and said, "Remember the conference? That was some weekend, huh?" Emily's fork froze midair. Her face paled, but she recovered quickly, laughing it off like it was an inside joke I wouldn't understand. "Yeah, it was productive," she said, her voice tight. "Sounds like it," I chimed in, forcing a smile. Dan gave me a look I couldn't quite decipher, half amusement, half something else. Before I could ask more, Linda returned, and the moment passed. On the drive home, I brought it up. "What was that about the conference?" I asked casually. "Oh, nothing," Emily said quickly. "He's just being Dan. You know how he is, always trying to make small talk." I nodded, pretending to accept the answer. But my mind was racing. Later that night, while Emily was in the shower, I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at her phone on the nightstand. The thought of going through it crossed my mind more than once, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Felt like a betrayal. Besides, I was probably overthinking things. But as the days ticked by, the unease grew, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I didn't know, something she wasn't telling me. I had no idea how right I was. As the wedding drew closer, I could feel a weight settling on my chest. It wasn't the typical pre-wedding jitters everyone joked about. This was different. Unease had begun to gnaw at me in small, insistent bites, and no amount of rationalizing seemed to quiet it. Emily was as radiant as ever, flitting between appointments and checklists, her focus laser-sharp on ensuring every detail of the big day was perfect. On the surface, everything looked fine, perfect even, but beneath the surface something felt wrong. There were moments, fleeting, easy to miss, where her energy shifted. Her enthusiasm came in bursts, too bright and too sudden, like a spark trying to ignite wet wood. Between those moments, there were silences. Not the comfortable kind we had shared so many times, but the heavy, evasive kind that felt like walls being built brick by brick. I first noticed it during the late-night phone calls. At first, they seemed harmless, work-related, I told myself, or part of the endless cycle of wedding planning. But her tone was different, sharper, more guarded. She'd step out of the room, lowering her voice to a murmur, her words just audible enough to make me strain to listen without really hearing. It wasn't just the calls. She had grown more protective of her phone, a habit that hadn't been there before. It was always face down on the counter, and when it buzzed, she'd glance at it quickly and lock the screen without saying anything. If I walked into the room while she was on it, her hand would drop subtly, the angle of her body shifting just enough to block my view. I kept brushing it off, telling myself that I was imagining things. Wedding stress, work fatigue. It all made sense, didn't it? But the excuses didn't quiet the unease. One night, when I came home late from a double shift, I overheard her voice coming from the kitchen. She didn't know I was home yet, and her words carried an edge I hadn't heard before. There was an urgency to her tone, almost like she was trying to control a fire that was threatening to burn out of control. I didn't need to hear the full conversation to know that whatever she was talking about, she didn't want me to know. The next morning, I couldn't shake the lingering doubt. It clung to me like a shadow, creeping into my thoughts even during the chaos of work. By the time I got home, I had convinced myself that I was overreacting. But then, as I walked through the door, her phone buzzed on the counter. It was the name on the screen that stopped me cold. Dan. Her mom's boyfriend. The message preview was short and nondescript, but it sent my mind racing. Why would he be texting her so often, and why hadn't she mentioned it? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe Linda had asked him to help with something for the wedding. But the question lodged itself firmly in my mind, refusing to be dislodged. As the days passed, the signs became harder to ignore. There was the email from a hotel, thanking her for a stay 3 months ago, the same weekend as the medical conference she had attended. But it wasn't the conference hotel. It was a small inn on the outskirts of the city. Then there was Dan himself. He started showing up more frequently, often without Linda. Each time, Emily would grow noticeably tense, her body language stiff and guarded. I caught him watching her once, his gaze lingering a second too long, the corners of his mouth twitching into something that resembled a smirk. Emily avoided eye contact with him, but there was something unspoken in the air between them, something that felt heavier than casual indifference. I didn't know what to make of it. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered before me, but they didn't form a complete picture. Yet, unable to shake the feeling that I was missing something, I reached out to Marcus, a private investigator I had befriended years ago. It wasn't an easy call to make. Admitting that I suspected Emily of hiding something felt like a betrayal in itself, but I couldn't ignore the voice in my head screaming that something wasn't right. When Marcus got back to me, his findings were like a punch to the gut. He had tracked her movements from the weekend of the conference, confirming that she had indeed stayed at the Riverside Inn. Not alone. Dan had been there too. The evidence wasn't overwhelming yet. Marcus had more digging to do, but the implications were clear enough to send my mind spiraling. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. Not without knowing the full truth. So I carried the knowledge like a stone in my chest, pretending everything was fine while my mind raced through scenarios, each one worse than the last. The wedding loomed closer, but the image of us standing at the altar felt like a cruel joke now. Every time I looked at her, I saw the woman I thought I knew, and the shadow of someone else entirely. I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold it together. The morning of the wedding dawned like something out of a dream. The vineyard was bathed in a soft golden light, the air crisp with the scent of blooming roses. Guests began to arrive, filling the rows of white chairs that lined the ceremony aisle. Emily looked breathtaking as she stepped into her gown, the intricate lace draping perfectly over her figure. She beamed at everyone, her joy so radiant it almost blinded me to the storm that had been building inside me. I told myself this was what I wanted, what I had worked for these past 3 years. All the doubts, the late-night whispers, and the unsettling glances from Dan. They felt distant now, swallowed up in the chaos of the day. Maybe I thought I was wrong. Maybe I'd let my mind twist itself into knots over nothing. As I stood at the altar waiting for Emily, I rehearsed my vows in my head. They were simple but heartfelt. Promises to love her, protect her, and build a future together. The words felt hollow, though, weighed down by the unease I couldn't completely shake. Then the music started. All the guests turned as Emily appeared, arm in arm with her mother, who had insisted on walking her down the aisle. She moved with grace, her veil trailing behind her like a delicate cloud. My heart twisted painfully as I watched her approach, torn between love and the creeping fear that I was about to tie my life to someone I couldn't fully trust. The ceremony began smoothly, the officiant welcoming everyone and speaking about love and commitment. Emily's hand trembled slightly in mine, and I squeezed it reassuringly, even though my own stomach churned. When it was time for the vows, I took a deep breath and looked into her eyes. Whatever doubts I had, I wanted this to work. I wanted to believe in the life we were about to start together. But just as I opened my mouth to speak, Dan's voice cut through the stillness. "Wait!" The sound was sharp and commanding, slicing through the quiet vineyard like a blade. A murmur rippled through the guests as heads turned, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock. Dan stepped forward from his seat, his face a mix of determination and desperation. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at Emily. "I can't let this happen," he said, his voice shaking slightly but resolute. "Emily, I'm sorry, but I need to tell the truth." The world around me seemed to tilt. My grip on Emily's hand loosened as I stared at Dan, my mind struggling to process what was happening. Emily's face went pale, her eyes wide with something I couldn't immediately identify. Was it fear? Guilt? The officiant looked at Dan, bewildered. "Sir, this is highly inappropriate." But Dan wasn't listening. He took another step forward, his gaze locked on Emily. "I love you, Emily," he said, his voice cracking. "I've loved you since that weekend at the conference. And I know you feel the same way. I can't stand here and watch you marry someone else, pretending like none of it happened." The murmurs among the guests grew louder, disbelief and confusion spreading through the crowd like wildfire. My chest felt like it was caving in, every word from Dan hitting me like a blow. Emily's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting between Dan and me. She stammered something unintelligible, but it was too late. The truth was out. Dan turned to face the crowd now, his voice growing stronger. "She didn't know I was with her mom back then. But when we met again at the conference, it just happened. We couldn't help it. We couldn't stop ourselves." I felt like I was watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. My legs felt rooted to the ground, my brain scrambling to catch up. The conference, the hotel, the hushed phone calls. It all clicked into place with a sickening clarity. Emily took a step toward me, her eyes pleading. "It's not what you think," she whispered. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I couldn't hear her. Rage and betrayal roared in my ears, drowning out everything else. The officiant, clearly overwhelmed, attempted to regain control. "I think we need to pause for a moment." But I didn't pause. Couldn't. My hand moved before I could stop myself, a sharp slap connecting with Emily's cheek. The sound echoed, silencing the murmurs from the crowd. Gasps filled the air, but I didn't care. I turned to Dan, my fists clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. "You son of a bitch," I growled, my voice low and trembling with fury. Before I knew it, I was on him, my fist colliding with his jaw. The impact sent him stumbling back, and the crowd erupted into chaos. People shouted, some trying to intervene, but I didn't stop. Years of rage and betrayal poured out in a flurry of punches, each one fueled by the image of him and Emily together. Eventually, someone pulled me off him. My chest heaved as I stood there, my suit disheveled, my knuckles raw. Dan lay on the ground, clutching his face, blood trickling from his nose. Emily sobbed openly, her hands shaking as she tried to approach me. "Please," she begged. "I made a mistake, but we can fix this." I stared at her, my heart a raw, bleeding wound. "No," I said, my voice cold and final. "We're done." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving behind the shattered remains of a day that was supposed to mark the beginning of forever. The days after the wedding felt like moving through the wreckage of a bomb blast. Everything I had believed in, Emily, our love, the life we were building, lay in ruins. I barely ate, barely slept, my mind cycling through the betrayal on an endless loop. The memory of Dan's confession, the slap, the fight. It all played over and over, searing itself into my brain. Emily tried to reach me in the days that followed. Texts, voicemails, even showing up outside my apartment. I didn't respond. Couldn't. Every word she spoke or wrote was another knife twisting in my chest. And I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of pretending there was anything left to salvage. Instead, I focused on one thing: making sure she and Dan faced the consequences of their actions. I filed for divorce the next morning. There was no waiting, no deliberating, no second-guessing. I walked into my lawyer's office with the kind of cold determination I usually reserved for high-pressure moments in the ER. My lawyer, an old friend from college, looked at me sympathetically as I explained the situation. "Do you have proof?" she asked. I thought of the hotel email, the private investigator's findings, and the public confession in front of 100 wedding guests. Proof wasn't the problem. The proceedings moved quickly. Emily didn't contest anything. She knew she had no leg to stand on. I made sure to take everything I could, financially and emotionally. The wedding expenses she had racked up, I left her to deal with them. The apartment we'd picked out together, kept it. I wasn't going to leave her a single thing to remind her of the life we had planned, the life she had destroyed. But the divorce was just the beginning. My focus shifted to Dan. I wanted him to feel the weight of his actions too. He wasn't just some random guy who made a mistake. He was someone who knew me, who had sat at my table, shared drinks with me, and smiled at me while stabbing me in the back. Through Marcus, my private investigator, I found out Dan had been involved in more than just shady relationships. He had a history of questionable dealings in his business ventures, and while nothing outright illegal had been proven, there were enough rumors to make me curious. It didn't take long to find something. Marcus uncovered evidence of Dan underreporting income to evade taxes. Armed with this information, I made an anonymous tip to the IRS. It was a small act of vengeance, but knowing the weight of an audit would hang over him like a storm cloud gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. Meanwhile, Emily was spiraling. Word of the wedding debacle spread quickly, thanks in no small part to social media posts from stunned guests. People who had once admired her for her grace and charm began whispering about the affair, the public confession, and her ultimate humiliation. Her perfect image cracked, and she began to retreat from the life we had built together. Despite everything, I couldn't stop myself from tracking her downfall. She moved in with Dan, though their relationship wasn't exactly the romantic fairy tale he had professed at the altar. Without the secrecy and thrill of sneaking around, their bond began to fray. One day, months after the wedding that wasn't, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Emily and Dan had gotten married in a small, private ceremony. No guests, no celebration. Just a courthouse exchange of vows that felt more like a desperate attempt to legitimize their affair than an act of love. I could have ignored it, let them sink into their miserable union without a second thought. But I wasn't ready to let go entirely. I went to the courthouse, showing up just as they were leaving. Dan's smug grin faded the moment he saw me, his hand tightening around Emily's. She didn't meet my gaze, her cheeks flushed with shame. I walked up to them, calm and collected, though my heart thundered in my chest. "Congratulations," I said, my voice laced with icy sarcasm. "You two deserve each other." Dan opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't let him. With one swift motion, I punched him square in the jaw, sending him stumbling back against the courthouse steps. Emily gasped, rushing to his side, but I didn't stick around to see if he got up. As I walked away, I felt a weight lift off my chest. It wasn't forgiveness, not for Emily, not for Dan, but it was closure. In the months that followed, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the steady rhythm of the hospital. I started seeing a therapist, unraveling the pain and anger that had consumed me. And eventually, I started to feel something I hadn't in a long time: hope. Emily and Dan became a footnote in my story. A painful chapter 1 had closed for good. I didn't care what became of them anymore. My life was my own again, and for the first time in years it felt full of possibility. The betrayal had scarred me, but it hadn't broken me. And that, I realized, was the best revenge of all.